Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Needs Some Introduction. In today's episode, a few topics we'll be covering. I'll be briefly giving you some additional feedback on Baby Reindeer. I reviewed the first four episodes of that series a couple of episodes ago, so track that down if you haven't listened to it yet. And in that same episode, also, Sona and I discussed the Hulu series Under the Bridge, and I will be recapping and discussing episode 3 and 4 of that series, and also giving you a mostly spoiler free review of the new Elizabeth Moss FX series, also available on Hulu, The Veil, which just premiered. The first two episodes premiered this week on Hulu. Before all of that, just a PSA for everybody if you are a regular listener to the podcast and did get an early version of the Guy Ritchie retrospective episode, which came out this weekend, pertaining to Argyle, Guy Ritchie's career, and the Gentleman series on Netflix. If you are a subscriber to this feed, you may have gotten a truncated, only like a minute and a half, 2 minute version of that episode. The full episode is available if you were waiting for it. So do refresh your podcatchers or try to stream that episode again. Later this week, I will be breaking down the first 6 episodes of the Apple TV series Sugar, which is about to have a very big plot twist. If you've been following that series and curious as to what the twist might be and want to get my feedback, stay tuned for that. And if you've been waiting to see whether you want to pursue that series or not based on the twist, well, I'll spoil it for you this weekend. Do await that episode. And in that same episode, I will be giving you my review of the new The Fall Guys, the Ryan Gosling, Emily Blunt action rom-com, which is coming out. Very entertaining film, by the way. So stay tuned for that. Next week, Sona will be back on the podcast discussing Under the Bridge and possibly The Veil as well, if she's been following that show. And probably we'll be discussing Bluey briefly with some of these new surprise episodes that have been popping up the past couple of weeks. And with many of the horror titles from the first half of the year now available to stream and watch at home, you can expect an episode that covers some of what's available, my reviews of what's been mostly disappointing so far this year in horror, but I'll give you some capsule reviews recommendation in that episode. So that'll be next week. But for today, I wanted to talk about the back half of the Baby Reindeer series.
You can't let her affect us like this.
It's not her affecting us, it's you. I miss you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is my stalker. Say hello to Mark.
Don't you say that to me! Apologize to me right now!
Can't take my mum anywhere.
I had seen the first 4 episodes of that season. I should say there's probably 7 episodes. So there were probably 3 remaining episodes after the first 4 that I watched in my initial review. The highlight of the season, if you can call it that, was that 4th episode in which the protagonist of the series, played by the creator of the show, acknowledges and re-experiences sexual assault, which is to a large extent his primary psychological driver in the very odd relationship he has with his stalker over the course of that season of television. Since then, the series has become extremely popular on Netflix. It continues to be #1 on their streaming service. It has really become a phenomena. It is a very difficult show to watch. I am pretty certain Netflix had no expectation that this thing was going to be a breakout hit for them, which is the fascinating thing about Netflix. You could imagine this had ended up on Peacock or on Acorn or something like that. And maybe it would get some good reviews, and maybe a handful of certain critics would have it on their top 10 list at the end of the year, but it would probably be relatively forgotten. And just because of the scale and scope of Netflix and their huge number of subscribers, this series just got a toehold and people started recommending it. And then it started climbing the charts. And then people started watching it and to go from there. And in no small part, the reason it has really crossed over to become such a phenomenon is because of what's been happening on social media around fans and detractors alike trying to track down who the stalker and the sexual assaulter were in real life. And that has just continued to fuel the popularity of the season. And I think to some extent that is somewhat detrimental. When this came out, the few reviews that were out there were extremely positive. And now you're starting to hear, even among the critical community, people really putting down what I think is a pretty brave and unique TV experience. one that I don't necessarily give an unqualified recommendation to because it can be very triggering. It is very difficult material. He is, in many ways, a very unsympathetic protagonist, which is part of the appeal of the series. So, in a vacuum, I wouldn't even know if I would just carte blanche give this a generic approval. But little would I have expected that this thing would become such a phenomenon. So, briefly, the social media reaction I find very interesting that some of these naysayers will simultaneously say the story is made up because he's not using real names. And then now that this woman herself has come forward, they accuse him of victimizing her again, when of course he has actually changed enough details where she was hard to find. And they basically are calling him out in both directions. It's made up. It's your accusations are too vague. And then when it's confirmed, well, then why did you victimize this obviously mentally disturbed woman? I call baloney on this entire argument. The reality is that even the most fictionalized stories out there have some kernel of truth. You could very easily see films that are explicitly defined as pure fiction that actually have very autobiographical elements within them. So if he had said this is all made up, and to a large extent he did, because he did not put his name on there, he did change the character's name, he changed the title of the characters in the series, the bar, the events, even so that they didn't tightly correlate to his biography. This is a false argument. If you hold anything to these standards, then everything is baloney, basically. Nothing holds up to that kind of scrutiny. What I think is true is emotionally, I think he is dealing with this trauma and he is taking, honestly, an incredible amount of blame for some of the negative consequences of his actions. As a matter of fact, if this was some less intimate bystander, someone who simply was adapting his original stand up material and the subsequent play that came from it, they may tend to make him a pure victim. Whereas he is perhaps most self critical. He hurts a lot of people. He worsens almost any circumstance he's in. And he openly admits that he is in some ways an addict for the drama. And I will not spoil the very, very last button, the final scene in this series. But anyone who thinks that this is trying to be a whitewash of him as a character has obviously not actually watched the series, which is another problem with some of these social media posts that are responding to someone else's reaction rather than having actually engaged with the material. If you make it to the end, and it is a short binge, if you can get past the triggering elements of the story, obviously, the final moments of the series put the blame squarely on him and have a very open acknowledgement that he's making of his own character limitations and how he has, in many ways, put himself in this circumstance yet again. So, once again, if you're curious about that, do check it out. Pretty courageous exploration of these topics and a complex examination of the protagonist himself. Oh, one last thing is, and I mentioned this even in the initial review, and I'll bring it up here yet again. Obviously, he wanted to protect, and there's also the whole libel laws in England, which are much more stringent than they are here in the United States. You can pretty much write anything about anybody here. It's not the same way overseas. But whereas I see and I understand his protecting of this mentally disturbed woman and how this has been quite some time since this has occurred, I am still a little confused as to him not coming forward with the identity of his sexual assailant, especially if, and once again, a lot of these elements of the story may have been modified, but if this truly is someone he met who was a mentor within the television comedy industry, and that person is still operating, then that person should be prosecuted, basically, and people should be warned. Now, has he made amends with this person? Has this person passed away in the meantime? I don't know any of those questions, and I don't want to become part of this speculation. I just do believe, obviously, if someone is out there continuing to commit these crimes, then there is a public service in informing people. And I hope, however, it has resolved itself. Somebody knows the issue hasn't been addressed. Okay, next topic, a spoiler free review of the first two episodes of The Veil.
I lost something a long time ago. And I've been trying to find out why I lost it ever since. Your life explained to me why the beautiful daughter of intellectuals and communists would take a flight and cross borders and walk up mountains to join that ugly, brutal circus.
I don't know why I did it. I think you know that. I would like to live long enough to find out why.
Now, before you pursue this at all, I will tell you just brief TLDR of my opinion so far of this season, of this series. Nothing in the story is unique or compelling in and of itself, but I did find the interaction between the two leads to be really compelling stuff. So for me, so far, I was very engaged with the first two episodes of this show. I'm prefacing all of this for you because I have not seen beyond the first two episodes. I don't get, this is not my profession. I don't get screeners, but they have made the entire only six episodes, by the way, and they're not that long. So maybe if you want something relatively short, if you like spy stories, not a bad investment of your time. Maybe wait and hear more consensus as the episodes unfold in the next month or so. But once again, I was pretty compelled by these first two episodes. I find the dynamic between the two women, which is like my catnip in spy stories, is when spies deceive themselves, deceive each other, what is actually truth. I love all that stuff. Worked really well, but this thing has horrible, horrible reviews. So the people who have seen the whole thing do not like this at all. So take everything I'm about to tell you with that grain of salt. So this story, or series, I should say, was created for the screen by Stephen Knight, a British TV producer, film director, screenwriter, most famous here in the US and worldwide for creating Peaky Blinders. So that's my first recommendation, by the way. All of Peaky Blinders is now available on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, there is a movie on the way. Cillian Murphy is coming back for the movie, despite his Oscar win and rise to fame. But in general, I have a very hit and miss reaction to most of his films and series. And I didn't even love Peaky Blinders. I liked it. I'd never finished it. I probably will finish it at some point. But what I do like in Peaky Blinders is what works in this series so far, which is this idea that you are embedded. What happens when you are potentially a spy within this gang? You have multiple motivations, your self preservation, your need to hide aspects of your own personality to just survive your current circumstance, which all is, by the way, we just covered the finale of Shogun here on the podcast. One of the most compelling aspects of Shogun as well is that whole idea that you need to be a person in public and yet someone else in your true heart. All of that is very interesting, all in Peaky Blinders as well. It is a main theme here in The Veil, but he has also written some pretty ponderous and often pretty flat and uninteresting scripts, to be honest, or bizarre ones like Serenity, a very strange film. I won't spoil it here, but has such a crazy twist in it that it'll be famous for that for forever, I guess, and maybe in its own way that has its value. But failures like The Girl in the Spider's Web, for example. Anyway, all this is to say he's very prolific and it's very hit and miss for me personally. But in the first two episodes of this particular series, The Veil, we meet Elizabeth Moss' character, Imogen Salter, who's actually an MI6 agent. And by the way, that's not even her name. We actually see her pulling off or completing her most recent mission in an airport. And as MI6 comes for the arrest, she's on the phone receiving her next set of instructions from her handler in France. And she asks for the alias Imogen. So we don't even know at this point what her actual name is. And it turns out that mission is to go to a refugee camp in the mountains separating Syria from Turkey. The camp is almost exclusively women. ISIS has killed all the men. And one of the women there, played by Yumna Marwan, the character's name is Adila, has been identified by multiple camp members, the other women there, as a head ISIS recruiter. Supposedly, she is this operative called the Genie of Raqqa. And in the mythology of the genie or the jinn, they are shapeshifters. And obviously, that is a very telling detail early on the show. The question as to who is this woman really. Imogen shows up, befriends her, pulls a knife on her. They pull knives on each other, and they have a pretty effective bonding sequence. And what's very interesting, and here's where the show works for me so far, is so much of this episode and the next one are these two women in the car together, feeling each other out. And the dialogue is relatively pat. The backstory is not that fascinating. We really don't know much about Imogen. There are flashbacks to some kind of trauma. There's a girl there. There's a reference that Imogen makes when she finds out that Adila has been separated from her daughter, that a mother and daughter should never be separated. So in Imogen's flashback moments, we see a young girl and also an older man. Now, was that a mentor? Was that her husband? Is this a daughter she lost? That's how I'm reading this right now. And it does appear that she has been separated from her family by some event, probably a terrorist attack. So I believe even this early on, we have hints here of a backstory in which Imogen has been compelled to become this agent to prevent another one of these attacks. And of course, that is exactly what the storyline is here. There is a rumor that there will be attacks within the next 7 to 10 days. This ISIS leader supposedly has important information, and Imogen needs to befriend her and then get the real story from her. Meanwhile, we get the backstory from Adila. Is this true or not? Remains to be seen. She was a model back in France with the promise of some kind of work. She was drugged, sexually assaulted, which once again, not explicitly said here, but we presume is the reason that she has this daughter. Her family rejected her. And at this low point, she was recruited by ISIS. And the hows of that, we don't know yet. She does hint at the fact that, well, the men don't recruit the women. It's older women who recruit women. And then, of course, is she talking about her current role within ISIS itself? So all of this is a cat and mouse. It's all played out in the open via these interactions with each other. It's very interesting that the Imogen character is so confident that she can crack this woman, can figure out what secrets she has, while it is completely obvious to both of them that they are trying to play each other. And that dynamic, that part of the show is exceptional. These two women in a car together, knowing that they're lying to each other, and within the lies, telling each other some aspect of the truth. And of course, that there is this agreement. The only way that Adila is going to escape her current circumstance, to leave this camp before she gets killed, to not be driven directly into the hands of military goons that will torture her or kill her, is to befriend this woman. And then Imogen has to pretend that she is a bleeding heart who's just trying to help this woman to reunite with her daughter when everybody knows that that's a lie. So the fact that they're openly lying to each other and yet they are testing and discovering each other is really interesting. To be honest, seeing this right after Shogun, another FX series, there might have been some intention of extending that aspect of what worked so well in Shogun into this season of TV. Now, is it going to continue to be this good? The reviews say no. But I am very interested in that so far. And I will investigate a little bit more. Okay, minor spoilers for episode 2. If you want to jump ahead a little bit and get into the Under the Bridge breakdown, just skip ahead 3 or 4 minutes. By the time we get to the end of episode 2, we see Josh Charles has shown up as an American in France. He knows everything that's going on. They've been monitoring their communications. He turns the smarm up all the way. This actor doing a great job of being a really smarmy, obnoxious American bully to a large extent, but very capable, knows exactly what's going on. And by the end of episode 2, Imogen's actually on the lam with this woman in tow. However, the Americans have abducted this girl off the street, the daughter, have tested her DNA. They just wanted some strands of her hair, then they release her because they want to match the blood to the mom. They had some blood samples from the original camp where she was assaulted. And they tell her, by the way, the DNA matches. She's her mom. Whatever you want to do with her now doesn't matter. She's not the target. But Imogen Both seems to be bonding with this woman, and yet she is very confident. Nope, this is the woman you're looking for. I'm certain of it, and I'm going to prove it. And of course, the clock is ticking. There's a terrorist attack planned within the week. And just in case we have any doubts that this woman is innocent, earlier in the episode, they had been in a library in Turkey where we heard more about this mythology of the genie. And someone at the end of the episode enters into the library, opens the same book that Adila had been examining, and finds a map that she has left there for them. So it remains to be seen what is her true agenda. Who is this woman for real? Will the crisis be averted? Those are interesting topics to me, and I do want to see more of this dynamic between the two women. So I will be continuing to check in with this show. Also on Hulu currently, the adaptation of the true crime book Under the Bridge. Do listen to the previous episode where Sona and I broke down the first two episodes, premiere episodes of the series. A bit of a cheat here. The cliffhanger at the end of episode 2 basically revealed that the prime suspect in the murder of Rena would not have made it home in time to have committed the murder, as she described it anyway. Lily Gladstone's character, Cam Bentland, at the end of that episode had driven top speed, blowing through red lights from the scene of the crime all the way back to the reformatory school, where she checked in just minutes before 12 o'clock. But Rena is on videotape at 11:47, and there's no way they could have made it across town in less than 15 minutes. So despite that cliffhanger, it's almost instantly that we realize that she could not have committed the crime, even if she confessed to it. And the author, Rebecca, played by Riley Keough, continues her investigation of these girls. She's the one who had come to Lily Gladstone's detective character with the confession from Josephine. And despite having that theory shot down right away, the two women do tenuously continue to explore this crime from very different directions. There's a couple of things going on here. We know that Rebecca is mistrustful of the police. She was a rebellious teen girl. She apparently, we don't know all the details here yet, had a very botched investigation of her brother's death some while earlier. And more to the point, over the course of these two episodes, we discover that these two women had a romantic relationship in the past as well, and that Rebecca had disappeared unexpectedly. Now, episode 3 was pretty boilerplate, I'd have to say, continuing the strands we had from the previous episode. Not a bad episode of television, but pretty expected. But episode 4 of the season was a very strong episode of TV. This episode is called Beautiful British Columbia, and perhaps borrowing from perhaps the best episode in the excellent Netflix season Beef, where the story rewinds and we see this immigrant story going back multiple generations. And even if it is inspired by the other series, it still is very effective here. To see in the current timeline, Rena rejecting her family and going deeper and deeper into this relationship with these troubled girls, and meanwhile having this immigrant experience conveyed of her grandparents coming to British Columbia, of desperately wanting to fit in, of becoming Jehovah's Witnesses as an anchor to this new land. Once again, having just finished watching Shogun, I can't help but think about that episode in which Mariko accepts the rosary beads as something to hold on to when there's nothing else. But apparently, this new society takes them in and they establish themselves in the country over decades. And of course, then we meet a younger version of Rena's mother, Suman, and how she first met her father, who was not of the correct faith, who was another foreigner, looking for his way of fulfilling this immigrant dream. And now they have built this family together, this life together. And of course, all of that punctured tragically by Rena's death. I was very moved by this episode. I mean, I'm an immigrant. My parents struggled when they first came to the United States. I never had this issue that Rena has here, where a desperate need to fit in to the detriment of everything else in your life. But I knew people who weren't even immigrants who did struggle with that at this point in their lives. And as the father of a young daughter who has tantrums over relatively minor things sometimes, I find this show pretty terrifying. I'll tell you. I mentioned this to Sona in our conversation as well, but this show, this is the scariest thing I'm watching right now for sure. And I'm actually just binging a bunch of horror movies to do a horror movie related episode that I teased at the beginning of this one. This is the scariest thing I'm watching right now is watching these girls destroy themselves for God knows what reasons. And as I watch the show, honestly, I do go back and forth as is this just a high minded way of being exploitative? Am I really learning anything here or am I just being scared? Is this just like Dateline NBC? Don't let your kids fall in with the wrong crowd. Look what can happen. But I don't feel that way in watching this, honestly. I feel like there is a real attempt to understand the psychology of these characters. And it's my limitation that I want someone to tell me, once again, because I'm in nervous dad mode here. How can I prevent this from happening? Right. I'm getting sucked into the Dateline NBC version of this story. But I don't think the job of the series should be to explain that. I made the recommendation to Sona that she see the girl from Plainville. And I do think that that tone does reflect here as well. This idea of not explaining this is how you prevent this from happening, but simply explaining as best as it can, imagining the psychology of the characters and what might drive this girl to, in many ways, betray her family just to try to fit in with this episode. We're seeing how their parents first met. We see this parallel action with the current context in which the girls, these troubled girls, have been invited to have dinner with the family. Things seem to go pretty well. And at least in the version of the story we see here portrayed, it is the lure of these supportive, kind parents that Josephine sees as a threat to the way she controls these girls. And this culminates with the father trying to say a prayer and judging Josephine's upbringing in his mind in a supportive way, but this is an affront to her and maybe a little salt in the wound for maybe a normal life that she actually wants. And slight sidebar before I wrap up the plot here. I think that's another thing that really works well here is to understand the different psychologies of these girls. They are not going to sit down and lay it all out on the line. I have nephews who are teenagers. They are not very expressive people. I do not expect these kids to be very introspective. I think they feel things and then they react. And I think that the actresses here, these younger actresses, do a great job of conveying these conflicting emotions within these characters. But perhaps worse than Chloe, perhaps worse than Josephine, is the Kelly Ellard character played by Izzy G, who releases their pet bird, and then either she or Josephine steal these very precious family heirlooms, emotionally precious at least, because the episode culminates with Josephine finding Rena's boots in her closet. And that's where Kelly informs her that she killed Rena and she did it for Josephine. In the past, we also discover that Rena, trying to get back in good with the girls after this disastrous dinner and the parents' assumption that they had stolen from them, have banned her from hanging out with the girls anymore. So the girls say, hey, why don't you move in here? All you have to do is accuse your father of molesting you, which she does. Her father gets arrested for. Once again, this is this is a horror movie for me. Really, it is. And one more character, couple characters that are still playing here as well, significantly. Dusty is the most empathetic character here. I think had the most empathy for Rena and is probably the most questioning of the motivations and actions of these other girls. But also, very importantly, is this character of Warren G, who is being pursued by Kelly, but has a current relationship with another girlfriend. And he seems to hint that he knows what actually happened. And spoiler alert for real life, but I think we're finally on to the actual culprits of this crime. So, this was an excellent episode of television. I think the entire cast continues to give very complex performances. There is a lot of competing emotional motivations within each one of these players. And I am very curious to know how are they going to continue to expound on this. It seems like we're halfway through the season. I think there's 8 episodes. I just confirmed, yes, 8 episodes. So 4 more episodes. The investigation will continue. One of the kids at least will probably crack. Maybe we'll see some of the court proceedings. That gives you 2 episodes, I guess 3 from what I just described. Is there enough material here for 4 episodes? Maybe we spend more time with Rena in the past and see what may have led to this break from her family so aggressively. So I'm not sure how they're going to structure the rest of the season, but I'm definitely very interested. if for nothing else, just the performances. But I think the psychology being explored here is rather fascinating and not exploitative in the way a lot of these shows oftentimes can be.
But they're just admiring our home. These girls, they don't have anything like this. And if we help them, we help Arena.
Every day she's more like them.
Come on. Once upon a time, we weren't what our parents wanted either.
Okay, so thanks for listening yet again. If you'd like to support the show, drop us an email, needsomeintroduction@gmail.com. Give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or any podcatcher of choice, a positive one, hopefully. If you have feedback, positive or negative, please do drop us a line. Follow me on Letterboxd. The link is in the show notes. You'll probably see a preview of many of my horror recommendations in a list I'll be publishing very soon. And this upcoming weekend, look for that episode, WTF is Going On with Sugar on Apple TV, and also a spoiler-free review of the new Fall Guy film, which is coming out this weekend. And next week, I'll be catching up with Sona on Under the Bridge, and I'm sure other things he's been watching as well. I'll talk to you soon.